The conference room was refrigerated to the point where the cold seeped into your bones. On the massive projection screen, a dense flow of charts and data glowed with a sleep-inducing green light, like a stagnant, lifeless pond. The air was a mix of printer ink, expensive perfume, and a faint, almost invisible thread of tension, a tightly wound string ready to snap with a piercing shriek. And me, Jack Wilder, sitting among this pack of seven-figure salary elites in a cheap suit I'd bought after the accident 3 days ago, stuck out like a sore thumb. My seat was at the far end of the long table, the furthest from the woman orchestrating all this, CEO Clare Vance, and the closest to the door. A perfect corner to make a quick getaway. Claire sat at the head of the table, the line of her profile as sharp and unforgiving as carved marble, stripped of any superfluous expression. She was listening to some department head's trembling report, her fingertips tapping a soft, yet impossible to ignore rhythm on the polished tabletop. No one dared to meet her excessively cold eyes. Except me. My gaze traveled across half the room and landed on the man beside her. Julian Thorne, the one that got away. He wore a silver gray suit so perfectly tailored it looked like it had been grown on him. Every strand of his hair was meticulously styled, and a faint smirk played on his lips, as if he regarded the entire world with a gentle condescension. He was leaning in, murmuring something to Claire, his posture intimate and natural. The moment he turned his head, his seemingly warm gaze locked onto me in the corner. The warmth evaporated like a receding tide, leaving behind nothing but cold, jagged rocks and undisguised contempt. The curve of his lips deepened, laced with raw provocation and mockery. I met his stare, cracked a grin, and showed him my teeth. My eyes sent a clear message. Just wait, you son of a bitch. The smile on Julian's face froze for a second before twisting into something colder. He looked away as if another glance would stain him, and whispered something else to Claire. She gave an almost imperceptible nod. The meeting droned on in a dull, tense atmosphere, a lullaby composed of buzzing murmurs, shuffling papers, and the monotonous hum of the air conditioner. Bored out of my mind, I was fiddling with my phone under the table when a tiny, yet incredibly sharp rip sound pierced the air. It was faint, like a snake slithering through grass, but I developed an almost primal instinct for the sound of these accidents. My head snapped up. Diagonally across from me, Julian Thorne was slowly retracting his hand. A document lay open in front of him, and in his hand was a small, elegant silver letter opener. Its blade caught the overhead light with a cold glint. My gaze, however, was locked on the sleeve of my suit jacket, which was draped over the back of my chair. A fresh, ugly gash had been torn straight from the seam, a good 5 inches long. The fabric fibers were violently ripped, frayed, and curled, like a gaping, jeering mouth. The room fell silent. Every whisper and rustle of paper vanished. Dozens of eyes swiveled like spotlights, landing first on me, then following my practically incendiary gaze to the savaged sleeve of my jacket. The air solidified, leaving only the tireless hiss of the central air, which now sounded unbearably shrill. Julian seemed to have only just noticed my stare. He raised an eyebrow, his face quickly assembling a mask of exaggerated, insincere surprise. He set down the small letter opener with a grace befitting a work of art. "Oh my," he exclaimed, his voice pitched just right for the whole room to hear, dripping with a sickeningly fake sympathy. "Mr. Wilder, my sincerest apologies. I was just organizing my papers, and the blade must have slipped." He held up his hands, his expression as innocent as a newborn lamb's. "Your jacket. It seems the quality is, well, not very resilient to accidents." He deliberately stressed the words quality and accidents, his tone lilting upwards with blatant disdain. "That jacket cost me half a month's pay, a bitter pill I'd swallowed just to show up at this goddamn meeting in Claire's world. It was nothing special, but it was my dignity. And now, that dignity had been publicly ripped to shreds and trampled like garbage." A hot, metallic-tasting rush of blood surged to my head, making my ears ring. The edges of my vision turned a furious red. All my composure, all the self-talk about just one more month and you're free, was instantly annihilated in the face of this naked humiliation. To hell with the contract. To hell with dignity. I signed a marriage contract, not an indenture. And I sure as hell didn't sign up to be this douchebag's punching bag. The legs of my chair shrieked across the polished floor. Like a cornered leopard, I shot to my feet. The movement was so violent that the gust of wind I created sent papers flying off the table in front of me. The loud noise made everyone in the room jump. Even Claire Vance, who had maintained her ice sculpture poise at the head of the table, snapped her head up. For the first time, her cold eyes focused clearly on me, a flicker of undisguised shock in them. The fake smile finally fell from Julian's face. He probably hadn't expected such a direct, violent reaction. He instinctively tensed, a flash of panic in his eyes, but it was quickly masked by a forced arrogance. "Jack!" Claire's cool voice was sharp, tinged with an urgency she couldn't hide, trying to stop me. "This is a boardroom. Sit down." Too late. My target was clear. I closed the distance in 3 long strides, the heavy soles of my shoes pounding a war drum rhythm on the pristine floor. I blew past several people in my path, my eyes locked on Julian's smug, detestable face. He must have panicked because he instinctively tried to back away, his body shoving the heavy leather chair. Its feet screeched horribly against the floor. He had nowhere to run. Behind him was the cold, floor-to-ceiling window. Just as he tried to stand, my right hand shot out like a viper. Not for him, but for the heavy, solid wood conference chair next to him. It was heavy, substantial. The muscles in my arm bulged, veins popping. I hoisted the chair with one hand, swinging it in a brutal, whistling arc. Time seemed to stretch. I could clearly see the reflection of the chair, growing larger in Julian's pupils. I saw the blood drain from his face, leaving behind only pure, unthinking terror. I saw him try to raise his arms to block, a gesture so pathetic and futile against the force of the swing. "Jack, don't you dare!" Claire's voice shot up, sharp with disbelief, as she leaped to her feet. Boom! A dull thud, heavy enough to stop your heart, smashed through the dead silence of the room. The back of the solid wood chair connected squarely with Julian's left side. The force of the impact was so great that the heavy chair flew from my grip, slamming into the conference room wall with a deafening crash before tumbling to the floor. It came to rest with one leg twisted at a sickening angle. Julian didn't even manage a full scream. The sound was choked off in his throat by the sheer force of the blow, turning into a short, grotesque gurgle. His entire body was lifted off the ground like a sack of garbage and thrown back into the leather chair he'd just been sitting in. The expensive chair couldn't take the impact. It slid backward with him, slamming hard into the plate glass window behind it. The entire massive pane of glass groaned and hummed. He was curled up in the toppled chair, his body convulsing violently. His face was a mask of pure agony, pale as if he'd been dredged in lime, and cold sweat instantly beaded on his forehead, running down his temples. He clutched his left side, his body coiled like a cooked shrimp. He made ragged, gasping sounds, each breath accompanied by a violent tremor and a pained groan, as if he might pass out at any second. Bright red blood began to seep through the fingers clutching his side, slowly staining the immaculate silver-gray fabric of his $1,000 suit like a hideous, blooming flower. The entire boardroom was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Dozens of pairs of eyes were wide, practically bulging from their sockets. Mouths hung open, big enough to fit an egg. The air had turned to cement. The only sound were Julian's suppressed, broken moans and hissing gasps for air, like a broken accordion grating on everyone's nerves. Claire was frozen in place, one hand still braced on the table from when she had stood up. Her eternally glacial face now had a massive crack running through it. Shock, disbelief, astonishment. A storm of complex, violent emotions churned in her cold eyes, threatening to spill over. She stared at the crumpled form of Julian. Then her gaze shot to me, her lips parting slightly, but no words came out. She looked at me as if I were a complete stranger, a monster that had just crawled out of hell. I stood my ground, my chest heaving. That one burst of rage had taken a lot out of me. I shook out my wrist, which was tingling from the force of the swing. Without sparing a glance for the whimpering Julian on the floor, my eyes shot across the frozen crowd and locked onto Claire's colorless face. "Claire, the contract didn't say I had to sit here like an asshole and let someone take a knife to my clothes, did it?" My voice wasn't loud, but it was like an ice-coated blade, slicing through the dead air with a cruel calm. My gaze flicked to the small silver letter opener on the floor, then to the glaring rip in my own jacket sleeve, before finally settling back on Claire's eyes. "Next time," I said, cracking a smile that was anything but friendly, enunciating every word. "He tries to pull a stunt like that. I promise you it won't be a chair. That fire axe in the corner looks pretty handy, too." I paused, my eyes drifting meaningfully to the bright red fire safety cabinet in the corner of the room. Time rewound to 1 month ago. The air in Claire's luxurious penthouse apartment was thick with the rich aroma of freshly ground artisanal coffee. Sunlight poured through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, spilling across the immaculate Italian marble floors, so polished you could see your reflection. Claire and I, husband and wife in name only, occupied opposite ends of the living room, a demilitarized zone between us. She, in a silk robe, elegantly flipped through a financial journal, the rustle of the pages conveying a cold distance. I was slumped on the sofa, the glow of my phone illuminating my face, the game's sound effects turned up to full blast. This bizarre cohabitation was held together by a $3 million prenuptial agreement and a treaty of non-interference. 3 years. 1 month left to go. I got out of the Marines 3 years ago. The little money I had for my service went straight to the family of a buddy who didn't make it back. I figured I could make it on my own, but then my dad got sick. That's when I met Claire. She offered a deal, a contract marriage. She'd cover the medical bills, and after 3 years, she'd give me another $3 million. Now, I was just running out the clock. $3 million was more than enough to buy the auto shop I had my eye on and get the hell away from this pretentious upper-crust world for good. The doorbell rang, shattering the fragile peace like an alarm. Claire set down her magazine, her face impassive. She got up to answer it. I didn't even look up, my fingers flying across the screen, guiding my character to slay another monster. "Claire," a man's voice, artificially high and full of a kind of theatrical surprise, echoed from the foyer. It was like a rusty saw cutting through the apartment's atmosphere. My thumb slipped. My character let out a pained cry and died. "TSK." I glanced up. A man stood in the doorway, tall and trim, dressed in expensive casual wear, his hair perfectly coiffed. His face wore an impeccable, calculatedly warm smile. He was holding a massive bouquet of Ecuadorian roses, so red they looked like a clot of congealed blood. It was Julian Thorne, Claire's legendary "one that got away," who'd been studying abroad. Claire was visibly taken aback for a moment. A complex emotion flickered in her cold eyes, too fast to catch, like a dark current moving under a sheet of ice. But the flicker was quickly frozen over again. She didn't take the flowers, just stepped aside. Her tone was as flat as if she were commenting on the weather. "Julian, when did you get back?" "Just landed. I haven't even adjusted to the time zone. I couldn't wait to see you." Julian's voice was cloyingly intimate. His gaze shot past Claire and landed squarely on me. His warm mask didn't move, but deep in his eyes, the look was like the tip of a poisoned needle, shooting undisguised contempt and scrutiny in my direction. He walked in, his leather shoes tapping on the polished floor, each step a declaration of ownership. "And you must be Mr. Wilder." He stopped in front of me, looking down his nose, a fake smile plastered on his face. He then extended a hand. "I've heard so much about you. Claire has such unique taste. Truly, one of a kind." He bit off the words unique and one of a kind with a heavy, meaningful emphasis. I slowly got up from the sofa. I was shorter than him by a few inches, but I didn't lose on presence. I raised my hand, but not to shake his, which was perfectly manicured and had clearly never seen a day of real work. Instead, I casually brushed off some non-existent dust from my sweatpants. "Oh, Julian, right? I think Claire mentioned you once or twice. What happened? Couldn't cut it overseas." My voice was flat, tinged with the laziness of someone who'd just woken up. Couldn't he just wait for me to leave? Why did he have to come looking for trouble? Julian's outstretched hand froze midair. The smile on his face solidified, and the malice in his eyes nearly spilled over. Claire's brow furrowed almost imperceptibly, her gaze flicking between us with a clear warning. Julian took a deep breath, forcing the venom back down. He retracted his hand, his smile becoming flawless again, only colder. You have a strange sense of humor, Mr. Wilder. He stopped looking at me and turned to Claire, his voice reverting to that deliberate softness. Claire, I brought you coffee machines over there. Claire cut him off, gesturing toward the open-plan kitchen, her voice still flat. Make it yourself. After she said it, she turned and walked straight to her study, leaving behind a cold, distant back, clearly wanting no part in the invisible war between us. Julian's smile finally cracked. He stared at the closed study door, his expression so dark you could wring water from it. A few seconds later, he whipped his head toward me, the gentlemanly mask peeling away like cheap paint, revealing raw malice and provocation. He clutched the garish bouquet of roses and stalked toward the expensive, fully automatic coffee machine in the kitchen corner. 2 days later, in the executive break room outside the CEO's office at Vance Tower, the massive windows overlooked the glittering city skyline. The sunlight was blinding. The lunch hour had just ended, and a few assistants were gathered, chatting in low voices, enjoying a brief respite. I was leaning against the counter with a mug, waiting for the hot water dispenser. What can I say? The coffee in Claire's office was too bitter. I preferred plain hot water. Jack, the schedule for this afternoon. Claire's chief of staff, a woman with immaculate makeup who was never anything less than perfectly composed, walked over with a tablet to give me the rundown. Her tone was polite, but the deep-seated distance in her eyes was a carbon copy of her boss's. Just then, Julian Thorne appeared at the break room entrance. He was in a light-colored suit today, looking slick and smug. He was also holding a fine bone china coffee cup, his face fixed with that trademark, harmless-looking smile as he headed for the coffee machine. The chief of staff immediately fell silent, giving him a slight nod. Mr. Thorne. Julian smiled and nodded back, but his eyes, like a cold snake's tongue, flickered over the cheap, cartoon character mug in my hands, a mug that was completely out of place in this environment. He walked to the machine and gracefully operated it, watching the dark liquid fill his expensive cup. I couldn't be bothered with him. My water was full. I picked up my mug to leave. Just as I turned, as our paths were about to cross. Whoa! Julian acted as if he'd tripped on something, his body lurching forward with an exaggerated gasp. The cup of freshly brewed, steaming hot coffee in his hand tilted at a very coincidental angle, heading straight for my chest. Scalding liquid, steam rushing at my face. It was pure instinct. In the fraction of a second it took for the coffee to leave the cup, my core tightened, and I twisted my body sideways in an awkward, but incredibly fast dodge. At the same time, my right hand shot out like lightning. Not to block the coffee, but to slap the inside of Julian's wrist hard and precise. Smack! A sharp, crisp sound. Pain shot through Julian's wrist. His fingers spasmed open, and the cup of hot coffee, along with the pricey bone china, instantly changed trajectory. Splash! The hot, brown liquid, mixed with shards of white porcelain, went flying. Most of it splashed directly onto Julian's own meticulously groomed face and the front of his light-colored suit. Aya! This time, the scream was blood-curdling and completely genuine. The hot coffee made him jump, his entire face flushing red like a boiled lobster. He frantically tried to wipe the coffee and ground from his face, his expensive suit now a disaster zone of spreading dark brown stains. The break room went dead silent. All the whispers stopped. A few assistants stared at the sudden drama, their mouths hanging open. The chief of staff nearly dropped her tablet. Julian was a mess. His face stung, his carefully crafted look was ruined, and he'd been publicly humiliated. He snapped his head up, his eyes venomous daggers aimed at me, his lips trembling. You did that on purpose. I stood there. The dodge and the slap had been a bit awkward, but I'd avoided most of the coffee. Only a few drops had splashed onto the back of my hand, barely warm. I shook my hand and smirked at his pathetic state. Mr. Thorne, you can't even walk on a flat surface. Bad eyes or bad legs. Should I call 911 for you? Or maybe an orthopedist? I pointed to the floor, which was clean enough to see your reflection in. Julian was shaking with rage, coffee still dripping from his face, which made his twisted expression look even more grotesque. He looked like he wanted to lunge at me, but the stinging pain and the eyes of everyone in the room held him back. 7. What's going on here? Claire's cool voice came from the doorway. She must have heard the scream. When she saw Julian, his face and suit a mess of coffee, And then me, standing there perfectly fine with my cartoon mug, a look of clear astonishment crossed her usually unflappable face for the first time. Her eyes darted between us, her brow furrowed. Julian acted like he'd found his savior, pointing at me to accuse me. Claire, I think Mr. Thorne was trying to offer me a coffee, but he slipped and burned himself. Looks like he's not used to this imported machine. Too much kick, maybe? I cut him off, my voice as calm as if I were giving a weather report. I shrugged, the picture of innocence. Claire's eyes swept over the shattered porcelain on the floor, the glaring stain on Julian's chest, his red, scalded face, and finally, my own clean hand, which had only a few drops of coffee on it. Her expression became incredibly complex. Her lips pressed into a hard line. In the end, she said nothing, just instructed her chief of staff. Anna, take Mr. Thorne to get cleaned up. She gave me a long, hard look. It was a look of scrutiny, of doubt, and maybe a hint of a cold, hidden warning. Then she turned and walked back in her office without another word. As Anna half-dragged, half-supported Julian away, he looked back over his shoulder and shot me a look of pure, murderous hatred. I just shrugged, picked up my cartoon mug, blew on the steam, and took a slow sip of warm water. Yeah, this was more my speed. Evening. In the private executive elevator of the Vance Tower, the polished metal walls reflected our two very different faces. The only sound in the cramped space was the faint hum of the elevator, an ominous background track. Julian stood in the corner, far away from me. He'd changed into a new suit. The burn on his face had been treated, but you could still see an unnatural redness. He kept his body turned away, as if he didn't want me to see his pathetic profile. Silence, thick and sticky, filled every inch of the space. The elevator descended. The red numbers ticked down from 30 to 29. Jack, do people like you, crawling up from the gutter, really think you can hit the big time just by latching onto someone like Claire? Julian's voice suddenly broke the silence. He didn't turn around, still speaking to the reflective wall, his voice low but laced with the cold, toxic hiss of a snake. He paused, as if savoring my potential reaction. The elevator hit 25. A kept man who has to sign his life away just to hang around Claire. A guy who can only drink coffee out of a cheap piece of crap like that. People like you reek of poverty and desperation to your very bones. Right now, Claire just pities you. Or maybe she's just using you to fend off some unwanted attention. Once she gets bored or one-side, he let out a contemptuous chuckle, full of smug superiority. His voice dropped even lower, taking on the tone of a vicious curse. Every word was a shard of poisoned ice hurled at me. Once she comes back to me, what do you think you'll be thrown out like the piece of trash you are? Ding. 8. The elevator stopped smoothly on the first floor. The metal doors slid open silently, and the bright lights of the lobby flooded in. The very instant the doors were fully open, I moved. No warning, no battle cry. My body was like a bowstring, tensed and suddenly released. Pivoting on my left foot, the motion was ghostly fast, driven by the brutal, honed power of a predator. My right arm was like a steel whip, locking precisely over his shoulder blade. My left hand shot down, grabbing his belt. I dropped my center of gravity, and my back and core unleashed a terrifying burst of power. Julian didn't even have time to gasp. He was airborne, the world spinning around him. His vision became a chaotic blur of the polished elevator ceiling, the cold metal walls, the bright lobby lights. Everything twisting and stretching. Thud! A sickeningly dull impact. Julian's meticulously curated body, like a heavy bag of cement, was slammed onto the hard, cold marble floor outside the elevator in a clean, brutal, over-the-shoulder throw. The sound was heavy, solid, with the gut-wrenching quality of bone hitting stone. Time seemed to freeze. The employees bustling through the lobby all stopped, as if someone had hit a universal pause button. Footsteps ceased. Conversations died. Dozens of eyes, like searchlights, locked onto the crumpled figure at the elevator entrance. Julian was splayed on the ground like a flattened frog, his limbs twisted at unnatural angles. The blood had drained from his face, leaving it a dead, ashen color. Cold sweat popped out on his forehead. His mouth was open, but no sound came out, only a broken, ragged gasping from his throat. After several seconds, a suppressed, high-pitched scream of agony finally tore from his lungs. "Ah, my back, my arm." He tried to curl up, but the slightest movement sent waves of excruciating pain through his left shoulder and back, making him convulse, and his screams turned even more shrill. I stood in the elevator, looking down at him. I rolled my wrists and shoulders. It had been a powerful move, but it felt good. I calmly stepped out of the elevator and walked over to Julian, who was twitching like a dying fish. I crouched down beside him. "Mr. Thorne," it was noisy in the elevator. "What were you saying?" "I couldn't hear you." My voice was quiet, but in the dead silent lobby, it boomed like thunder, carrying a near-cruel calm. I leaned closer to his pain-twisted face, a cold smile playing on my lips, and lowered my voice so only he could hear. "Next time you run your mouth, make sure your bones are strong enough to back it up." Julian's vision was going dark from the pain. Cold sweat soaked his expensive suit. He stared at me, his eyes filled with absolute agony and hatred, his lips trembling. He couldn't form a single word, only pain moans. "What happened, Nine?" Claire's sharp, urgent voice cut through the crowd. She must have heard the commotion and rushed over. When she pushed through the onlookers and saw Julian writhing on the floor, a pathetic, screaming mess, and then me, crouched beside him looking completely unruffled, her perpetually calm face registered a second, massive, undeniable shock. Her pupils constricted. Her gaze darted back and forth between me and Julian on the floor, finally locking onto me. Her expression was a complex storm, astonishment, disbelief, and even a flicker of fiercely suppressed, cold fury. "Jack, what did you do?" Her voice was a little shrill, a tremor in it she probably didn't even notice. I stood up, brushing off imaginary dust from my pants. I met her scrutinizing gaze head-on. "Claire, I think Mr. Thorne wanted to spar a little. A friendly contest." I pointed to the mirror-like floor. "Unfortunately, he lost his footing. Slip." I paused, looking at Julian's agonized face, and added, "It was a pretty bad fall, from the sound of it. He probably fractured something. I'd recommend getting him to a hospital. Don't want to set wrong." Claire's chest rose and fell sharply. She looked at Julian's miserable state, then back at my it-wasn't-me expression. Finally, she took a deep breath and barked at the security guards and assistants who had rushed over. "What are you standing around for? Call an ambulance." Her eyes landed on my face again, her gaze as deep and cold as a winter lake, carrying an unprecedented level of scrutiny and warning. She didn't question me further, but the silent pressure was heavier than any reprimand. Back to the present. The boardroom was filled with a tangible silence. Julian was curled in the toppled leather chair, his body trembling, each twitch accompanied by a pained gasp. He clutched his left side, sweat and tears plastering his hair at his face. His lips trembled, but he could only manage broken, choked sounds like a fish gasping for air on dry land. The faint smell of blood mixed with the scent of expensive leather and printer ink, creating a bizarre, nauseating odor. Everyone in the room was petrified. Dozens of eyes were nailed to me, a mixture of horror, fear, and disbelief threatening to tear me apart. Someone unconsciously covered their mouth. Someone else stumbled back against a wall with a muffled thud. Claire stood there, a frozen statue. The knuckles of the hand she used to brace herself on the table were white from the pressure. Her stunning, ice-cold face was now fractured beyond repair. Shock, astonishment, and even a trace of bewilderment? The storm in her deep, all-knowing eyes finally calmed into a heavy, repressed tempest. Her gaze lingered on my face for a full 5 seconds, sharp as a scalpel, as if trying to dissect me to see what I was made of. Then, her eyes slowly moved to the whimpering Julian, to the glaring bloodstain. Her brow tightened. "Jackie." Her voice finally broke the suffocating silence. It was no longer calm and cool, but trembled with a fiercely controlled, icy rage. "Claire, everyone saw it. He started it." I cut her off flatly. My voice wasn't loud, but it was perfectly clear, carrying an almost shameless frankness. 10. I held up my arm, showing the ugly gash in my suit sleeve to everyone. My eyes flicked to the small silver weapon on the floor. In broad daylight, in a boardroom, he takes a blade to a colleague's clothing. What do you call that? Destruction of property. Assault. I paused, glancing at the moaning figure of Julian, and a cold smirk touched my lips. I was just defending myself. In the heat of the moment, I grabbed the first thing I could to block him. Who knew he was so fragile? Defending yourself? You. Claire's voice rose, sharp with repressed fury. She had probably never witnessed such a brazen, self-righteous definition of self-defense. Ms. Vance, her chief of staff, Anna, rushed in, her face pale, her voice on the verge of tears, clearly alerted by the commotion. The paramedics, they're downstairs, Mr. Thorne. Claire took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing her emotions down. She gave me one last complex look, a look that contained a cold warning, incredulous scrutiny, and a hint of profound exhaustion. She turned away from me and addressed the security guards at the door, her voice regaining its usual hardness, though laced with an underlying tension. Get him downstairs, carefully, to the hospital now, and notify his father. The guards, as if granted a pardon, scrambled to carefully extract Julian from the chair. Every slight movement sent a fresh wave of pig-like squeals from him, setting everyone's teeth on edge. His hateful eyes found me through the gaps in the crowd, his lips moving silently. I could make out the words, "You're dead." I just shrugged and even gave him what could pass for a friendly smile. What a joke. My contract was to play the role of her husband for 3 years. Even though most people in the company knew it was a sham, to the outside world, I was legally her husband. If I got into real trouble, she'd be more nervous than I was. 3 days later, the underground parking garage. Pale fluorescent lights cast a cold glow on the expansive concrete space. The air was a stale mix of gasoline, rubber, and dust. I had just wriggled out from under an old, beat-up sedan I was working on, my hands covered in black grease. The car was a piece of junk, a real pain in the ass to fix, but I was almost done. My own ride, an equally battered but heavily modified old Jeep, was parked nearby. The roar of an engine grew closer, an arrogant bellow that shattered the garage's quiet. A sleek, all-black Porsche 911 shot around the corner like a shadow, carrying an air of aggressive entitlement. It didn't slow down, like an enraged bull, aimed straight for my Jeep, right where I just opened the driver's side door. The speed was insane. The distance was closing fast. This was no accident. He was aiming to do some serious damage. In a split second, my pupils contracted. My body reacted before my brain could process. I kicked off my right foot, launching myself sideways in a diving roll, a blur of motion. Screech! A deafening shriek of metal on metal, accompanied by a sickening, tearing sound, assaulted my ears. 11. The right side of the Porsche 911's front end had brutally scraped along the driver's side door of my Jeep. The Jeep's weathered door instantly buckled inward, the window exploding in a shower of glass that rained down like hail. The car alarm began to wail, a shrill cry piercing the dead air of the garage. The offending Porsche then executed an arrogant fishtail, its tires screaming against the concrete, and came to a neat stop a few yards away. The window lowered slowly, revealing Julian's face. His left side was still wrapped in a thick brace. His face was pale from pain and blood loss, but his eyes were unnaturally bright, burning with a crazed, vengeful glee. He leaned back in the driver's seat, looking at me with open provocation as I climbed to my feet. A vicious smile spread across his face. Well, if it isn't Jack the mechanic. Fixing up some junk? Whoops, my bad. New car. Not used to the acceleration. Accidentally clipped your scrap heap. His voice was hoarse from his injury, but it was dripping with intentional mockery. He drew out the words scrap heap, his eyes lingering on the Jeep's mangled door with utter contempt. Trash like this, driven by gutter rats like you, shouldn't even be allowed to pollute the air in here, he sneered. He then stuck his hand out the window and gave me the middle finger. Next time, learn to stay away from real cars. You couldn't afford to fix a scratch on this, even if you sold yourself. With a self-satisfied whistle, he started to raise the window, ready to leave. I stood there, brushing the dust off my clothes. My dive had been just in time. Aside from a scraped elbow, I was fine. I looked at the ugly gash on my Jeep, the shattered window, and listened to Julian's venomous tirade. A cold fury instantly burned away the fatigue from working on the car. "Mr. Thorne, not used to the new car?" I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was like grinding ice cutting through the wail of the alarm. I started walking slowly toward his arrogant Porsche, my eyes fixed on his gloating face. "I think it's your brain that you're not used to." The smile on Julian's face froze. The half-raised window stopped. He clearly hadn't expected me to just walk up to him. A flicker of alarm crossed his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by disdain. "I honestly don't get why he always thinks I won't touch him." I walked right up to the driver's side, the window fully down now. Julian's taunting, hateful face was just inches away. I didn't look at him. My gaze went past his shoulder to the back seat of the Porsche. Lying there was a brand new golf club, its metal shaft gleaming coldly in the dim light. Without a moment's hesitation, my arm shot through the open window like a striking snake. Before Julian could even react, my hand closed around the cold metal shaft of the club. "What are you doing?" Julian finally snapped out of it, his voice rising in panic. "Too late. 12. I gripped the club with both hands, took a hard step back, and with a surge of power from my core, I swung the heavy metal club high over my head. It cut a vicious, whistling arc through the air. My target wasn't Julian. It was the pristine, flawless symbol of his wealth and status, the Porsche's front windshield. Crack KOM. An earth-shattering explosion of sound. It was like a thunderclap in the enclosed space of the parking garage. The reinforced safety glass, met with the full force of a heavy metal club, instantly spiderwebbed. A network of cracks spread like lightning, and a massive crater formed at the point of impact. A cascade of tiny glass cubes poured into the car, showering the driver's seat and a stunned Julian. Julian let out a shrill, high-pitched scream. He instinctively threw his hands up to protect his face, but the falling glass still managed to cut his arms and cheeks, leaving a series of small, bloody scratches. He was completely stunned, seized by the shock and terror of the moment. He sat frozen in his seat, his face covered in glass dust, his eyes wide with a mixture of pure horror and disbelief, like a rabbit caught in headlights. The last of the glass fragments tinkled onto the dashboard. I stood outside the car, holding the club, and looked coldly at the pathetic, trembling figure in the driver's seat. How about now? Getting the hang of the acceleration yet? I casually tossed the club onto the ground with a clang, my voice as calm as if I were asking for the time. A few days later, the massive backdrop for the Vance Horizon Tech Strategic Partnership signing ceremony and gala glittered under the grand ballroom's crystal chandeliers. The air was a cloying mix of high-end champagne, rich cigars, and a dozen different expensive perfumes. It was a sea of designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos. The titans of industry held their glasses, their faces adorned with practiced, polite smiles, murmuring to each other as they wove their invisible networks of power and influence. I was navigating the long buffet tables with a plate piled high with food, tender Wagyu beef bites, caviar top spoons, golden brown seared foie gras tarts. I had zero interest in schmoozing. Filling my stomach was the main priority. The new navy blue suit I was wearing, while not in the same league as the five-figure custom jobs around me, at least fit properly, and it didn't have any new gashes in it. Claire, naturally, was the center of the universe. She wore a stunning silver mermaid gown that clung to her curves, her hair swept up to reveal the elegant line of her neck. She was a goddess of ice and moonlight. She moved through the crowd with a glass of champagne, chatting with important partners, radiating an aura of absolute control. Julian was her loyal shadow, sticking close by her side. He had on a flamboyant white tuxedo, his face carefully made up to hide his recent injuries, though you could tell his ribs were still bothering him from the stiffness of his movements. He wore a gentle, refined smile, occasionally leaning in to whisper in Claire's ear, but his eyes were like poisonous searchlights, scanning the crowd until they locked onto me, currently engrossed in a slice of black truffle cake. He picked up his wine glass, a cold smirk playing on his lips, and started walking toward me. I had just forked a piece of cake into my mouth when a shadow fell over me. "Mr. Wilder, enjoying the food?" Julian's voice was pitched just loud enough for everyone within a 10-foot radius to hear. He swirled the red wine in his glass, the liquid reflecting the undisguised malice in his eyes. I ignored him and continued chewing. The black truffle was rich and earthy. Excellent. My indifference clearly infuriated him. He took a step closer, his voice rising, colored with a deliberate, attention-grabbing mockery. Well, I suppose it makes sense. A man like you, who has to rely on his face and a contract to even get into a place like this, has to eat his fill. Got to live up to that boy toy reputation, right? After all, once tonight's over, you'll probably never get to taste food this good again, will you? He bit down hard on the words boy toy, making them sharp and clear, like 3 poison daggers aimed right at me. The few guests chatting nearby fell silent, their eyes flicking over to us, filled with a mix of shock, contempt, and morbid curiosity. Julian seemed pleased with the effect. He glanced at the watching eyes, his smugness growing. He continued in that same insulting tone, loud enough for the whole corner of the room to hear. But I have to wonder, Mr. Wilder, when the contract is up and Claire kicks you to the curb, once you return your rented suit, how will you make a living? Back to construction sites? Or back to your old job, chauffeuring rich old ladies around? He paused maliciously, his eyes scanning my off-the-rack suit, his smile turning venomous. Oh, I almost forgot. A piece of work like you, even the rich old ladies would probably find your driving skills a bit rough, wouldn't they? After all, what real skills could a useless, kept man possibly have? The air seemed to solidify. The whispers stopped completely. All eyes were on me, like 1,000 sharp needles. There was some pity in those stares, but mostly there was naked condescension and disdain, as if they were all silently agreeing with Julian. I was just a gold digger, a man who lived off a woman. Claire noticed the commotion. She pushed through the crowd and strode over, her face an icy mask. She shot Julian a furious glare, her eyes burning with a warning, furious that he was making a scene. Then her gaze turned to me. It was incredibly complex. Anger, helplessness, and even a fleeting, barely perceptible flicker of concern, but it was quickly buried under a deeper layer of ice. She stood between us, facing Julian, her voice tight with rage. Julian, you've had too much to drink. Shut up. But to Julian, her intervention felt like she was taking my side, a confirmation of his victory. The triumphant look on his face became even more blatant. He ignored her warning and mouthed 2 silent words at me. Use. Less. The instant Claire's words left her mouth, I moved. No shouting, no wasted motion. Under the astonished gaze of everyone in the room, under Claire's warning and slightly panicked eyes, my hand shot out. Fast, precise, vicious, like a hawk diving for its prey. My fingers, like steel talons, clamped down on the crisp lapels of Julian's white tuxedo jacket, and I yanked him forward. The sudden force caught Julian completely off guard. The smug look on his face twisted into panic. He stumbled forward, the wine glass flying from his hand and shattering on the floor with a pop, the red liquid splashing like blood. He opened his mouth to protest, horrified, but it was too late. My other hand snatched a freshly opened, nearly full bottle of Bordeaux from the nearby table. The heavy glass was cool in my palm. The muscles in my arm bunched. Power exploded from my core, surging through my shoulder and down my arm. I brought the heavy wine bottle up, tilted it downward. Glug, glug, glug. The deep red, fragrant liquid became a torrential flood, aimed directly at Julian's mouth, which was wide open in a silent scream of terror. I poured relentlessly. Julian choked, panicked. He struggled wildly, his hands clawing at my arm, his feet kicking uselessly. But my grip on his jacket was like iron, and my other hand held the bottle steady. He couldn't break free. He could only endure the violent, cold rush of the wine. Wine flooded his throat, his sinuses. He made choked, suffocated whimpering sounds, his eyes bulging as if they were about to burst, filled with absolute terror and disbelief. The front of his expensive white tuxedo was instantly soaked with a dark, spreading stain. Wine ran down his chin, his neck, soaking the shirt underneath, leaving him looking like he'd been doused in paint. The entire ballroom went completely, utterly silent. Tom had stopped. All conversation, all clinking glasses, all music, vanished. The only sound were the gurgling of wine being forced down a throat and Julian's desperate, drowning whimpers. Everyone was stunned into paralysis by the raw, brutal, and completely unimaginable scene. Jaws dropped, eyes widened, hands holding champagne flutes froze mid-air, and smiles curdled on their faces. Claire stood right there, so close she could see the fine spray of wine. She was completely frozen. Her face, always so composed and in control, was now a mask of pure, indescribable shock. Her pupils were dilated to their absolute limit, reflecting the insane scene playing out before her. Her mouth was slightly agape. She had forgotten to breathe. Her expression was that of someone witnessing a satanic ritual, a look of horror, confusion, and the blankness of someone whose entire worldview has just been shattered. She looked like she wanted to intervene, but her body was nailed to the spot. I didn't stop until the heavy bottle of Bordeaux was empty. Thump! I dropped the empty bottle on the thick carpet. Then I let go of Julian's jacket. Ugh! Cough, cough, cough. Blech! Like a puppet with its strings cut, Julian collapsed. His knees hit the carpet with a soft thud. He clutched at his own throat, his body convulsing, and erupted in a series of gut-wrenching coughs and violent, retching heaves. A foul mixture of dark red wine and stomach bile spewed from his mouth and nose, splattering all over the expensive carpet beneath him. He curled up on the floor like a crushed insect, reduced to nothing but painful spasms and pathetic, messy vomiting. His flamboyant white tuxedo was now no better than a dirty rag. The sharp, sour stench of alcohol and vomit filled the air. I stood over him, shaking a few drops of wine from my hand. I looked down at the inhuman, miserable wreck on the floor, my voice as calm as if I were asking a waiter for a napkin. So, are we sober now? At this point, I was just praying for the contract to end. Not for the money anymore, but because I was starting to worry about Julian. I honestly didn't know if his pea-sized brain could handle another encounter with me without getting permanently scrambled. The top-floor CEO's office. Outside the massive floor-to-ceiling window, the city lights flowed like a river of stars. Inside, only a single floor lamp in the corner was lit, its dim yellow light making the vast space feel even emptier and deeper. Claire sat behind her large desk, her back to the window, her silhouette almost merging with the cold, glittering cityscape. The light only caught one side of her face, the lines drawn tight, as hard and unyielding as marble. A document lay open in front of her, but she clearly wasn't reading it. Her fingers tapped an unconscious rhythm on the desk. Tap, tap, tap. In the unnaturally quiet office, the sound was as loud as a countdown timer. I sat in the chair opposite her, my posture relaxed, almost lazy. 1 month, 5 confrontations, 5 acts of self-defense. Each one had tiptoed the line of the law and our contract, though Claire probably pulled some strings, and each one had cost Julian dearly, while shredding the nerves of the Ice Queen CEO. Now it was finally over. This is yours. Claire finally spoke, her voice like it had been steeped in ice water, devoid of any emotion. She slid a thin check across the desk. It glided to a stop in front of me, the motion sharp, as if she were desperate to be rid of it. The check had a faint, cold sheen in the dim light. I glanced down at it. $5 million. $2 million more than the $3 million specified in the contract. I raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. I just looked up at her. In the dimness, her expression was unreadable, her eyes like a deep, bottomless pool. There was no anger, no questions, not even a ripple of emotion. Just a profound, indescribable exhaustion, and a kind of relief, the distant air of someone who has finally shed a heavy burden. The extra $2 million is compensation for your additional services over the last 3 years, Claire said, her gaze seeming to pass right through me, landing on some point in the empty space beyond. Her voice was still cold. Additional services? Did she mean being her human shield, or beating her precious one that got away to within an inch of his life? Or both? I smirked. I wasn't about to question it. Only an idiot turns down free money. I picked up the light, yet heavy, piece of paper and held it up to the lamp, checking the watermark with the practiced ease of someone inspecting an invoice at a garage. Looks legit. With a flick of my wrist, the check vanished into my inner jacket pocket. Generous of you. It's been a pleasure. I stood up, the motion clean and final, without a hint of sentimentality. The legs of the chair made a faint scraping sound on the floor. 16. I turned and walked toward the door, my steps steady, without a moment's hesitation. 3 years of a marriage, a $5 million contract, all settled in the cold light of a single lamp and an even colder silence. Behind me, dead silence. Just as my hand was about to touch the heavy, solid wood doorknob that symbolized our separation, Claire's voice came again, very soft, like a feather drifting onto a frozen lake, carrying a complex, faint tremor she probably wasn't even aware of. "Jack." I paused but didn't turn around. "Take care." A brief silence filled the vast office. Under the dim light, the air seemed to hang still for a moment. Still facing away from her, my shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my old, scuffed-up phone, and my thumb tapped out a quick message. A soft beep confirmed it was sent. Only then did I turn around, a smirk on my face that was definitely not gentle, maybe even a little cocky. I held up my phone toward the shadowed figure behind the desk. "Thanks, Claire. Don't miss me too much." My voice was as light and easy as if I just closed a small-time deal. Without waiting for a reaction, I pulled open the heavy door and walked out, not looking back. The door closed silently and heavily behind me, sealing off the dim light and the woman I could never really get close to. Outside the door was the brightly lit, but equally cold, corporate hallway. My phone screen was still on, showing the sent message. Recipient, Claire Vance. The message was just 3 words, "Don't miss me." My finger hovered over the screen for a second. My expression was flat, just a pure, settled indifference. Then my finger came down decisively, landing on the delete button. "Delete contact Claire Vance?" "Confirm." The screen flickered. The name, and the number I knew by heart, vanished from my contacts as if they had never existed. The elevator descended, the numbers flashing by. I walked out of the towering, ice-cold skyscraper that was the Vance Tower, and the chill of the late autumn night hit me, carrying the city's unique smell of noise and dust. I pulled the collar of my worn-out jacket tighter, reached inside, and patted the pocket with the check, feeling its solid, reassuring weight. I didn't look back at the monument of wealth and confinement. I hailed a cab. "Hey, man," I said, sliding into the back seat and giving him an address. "Old neighborhood. The Astoria Night Market." The car merged into the river of traffic. The neon lights of the city streaked past the window, casting flickering patterns on my face. I leaned back and closed my eyes. 17. $5 million. More than enough startup capital for the garage. I go and sign the lease on that spot tomorrow. I even had a name picked out, Wilder's Garage. Simple. I liked it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Not a call. A text alert. I frowned and pulled it out. The screen lit up. A strange, unsaved number was sitting in my notifications. The message was extremely short, just 2 words. "Take care." Sent just a few minutes ago. My eyes rested on those 2 words for a second. My thumb gently brushed the cold screen. Then, without replying, I moved my finger, expertly navigated to the menu, and selected the number. "Block this number." "Confirm." The screen went dark. The taxi rounded a corner, leaving the glittering neon lights behind. Ahead lay the unique, warm glow of the old neighborhood. Not as bright, but infinitely more welcoming. "Here you are, kid," the cabbie's gruff voice announced. "Thanks, man." I paid and got out. A wave of heat and noise hit me full force. The roar of the crowd, the sizzle of hot oil, the intoxicating mix of 100 different food smells. Char-grilled skewers, spicy hot pots, funky fermented tofu. The clang of woks on high flames, the booming calls of the vendors, the cheerful shouts of friends clinking beer bottles. It all merged into a powerful, vibrant torrent of life that instantly washed away the last traces of the Vance Tower's coldness. "Yo, 20 lamb skewers, 10 brisket sliders, and a case of ice-cold beer." I confidently strode up to my usual spot, pulled over a greasy plastic stool, and sat down, my voice booming. "Hey, Jack. Long time no see. You hit the jackpot or something?" The burly, shirtless owner, a towel slung over his neck, laughed as he expertly flipped skewers on the grill, sweat glistening under the lights. "Jackpot, my ass. Just got rid of a major pain in the ass. Bad juju. Tonight, I'm drinking till I drop." I shot back with a grin, taking a freshly opened ice-cold beer from one of the guys next to me, condensation still smoking from the bottle. The cold beer went down smooth, a refreshing shock to the system. The smoky aroma of the grilling meat filled my nostrils. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a news alert. I casually swiped it open. The headline from a local news outlet jumped out at me. The bold black text standing out against the greasy plastic tabletop. Breaking: Julian Thorne, heir to Thorne Industries, hospitalized with serious injuries after late-night DUI crash. Vehicle lost control, struck guardrail. Sources report high blood alcohol level at the scene. The story was accompanied by a blurry photo of the scene. The twisted wreckage of a black sports car tangled in a guardrail, surrounded by flashing red and blue police lights. A fresh plate of sizzling lamb skewers arrived, steam rising from them. I put my phone down, grabbed a skewer, and took a huge bite. The hot, savory juices exploded in my mouth, rich with the taste of cumin and chili powder. "Hey, another 2 spicy sausages over here, extra hot." I yelled through a mouthful of food, then took a long pull from my beer. The exhilarating combination of hot and cold sent a shiver down my spine. The noise of the crowd swallowed me whole. The clinking of bottles, the raucous laughter, the sizzle of meat on charcoal. It was the real, raw, messy sound of being alive. As for Julian Thorne, lying in hospital. As for the ice-cold Claire Vance. As for that "take care" text. They could all go to hell.